What's up, SDS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor as Detective Fil Waters is muttering to himself on a Friday morning for him, a Friday afternoon for us. Great Scott, it's your True Crime Phil with Fil and Scott. Who else? It's a show so good, it happens every Friday, and I got to say, I've really grown to love these two men and STS Nation, and I love the fact that it happens on Friday when I'm a little loopy and I don't know, not thinking quite rationally. Anyway, let me introduce Fil for the 9 millionth time. He is America's most respected detective. He spent decades in law enforcement, becoming a world expert at obtaining criminal confessions. I just told Susan Constantine the other day, I don't know that I'd want to be Phil's son because he would obtain confessions from me. I'd have to get Shane on the show one day. He spent 23 years working as a homicide detective in the Houston PD. He's investigated more than 400 homicide cases. He is also a Marine and the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations, and he also starred in the show The Interrogator, but he just starred in a better show called Surviving My Best Case, which Scott Duffy also appeared on. And Fil told me an amazing story last night, a crazy story with crazy twists and turns about a triple homicide he investigated in Houston in 2015. And we will have that for you in about a week or so after the chief technical officer and now my chief editor-in-chief, chief editor. I guess an editor-in-chief would be for a newspaper. Once she's done editing is what I'm saying. We'll have it. Meanwhile, Scott Duffy, who I could tell got a nice, sweet new haircut and is sporting a great, look at that. Look at that. He is a retired FBI supervisory special agent of the Wilmington, Delaware resident agency. He worked violent crime matters, gangs, bank robberies, and fugitive task force cases for 20 years. Prior to the FBI, he served 5.5 years as a Pennsylvania police officer. And if you haven't seen Great Scott's Surviving My Biggest Case, it's all about a wild bank robbery, which takes on a life of its own. A quick reminder, this Sunday, a new time, 12 p.m. Eastern time, it is going to be Brunch with Carm. She's making her comeback. Don't call it a comeback. She's going to be live from Israel, so we have to do it at noon. I've got to accommodate Hawaiian time, Israel time. The guests are in LA, so we are truly an international global show. So she will be back Sunday. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We are Podcast STS, Patreon, and YouTube. Feel free to support the show. And the merch store is open, and I'm working on getting the hats. Since we are beginning with the evildoer, as Fil calls him, as you know, I like to begin by remembering the victims. Of course, we've got Kaylee Gonzalez, 21, Madison Mogan, 21, Zana Kernodal, 20, Ethan Chapin, 20. Let us not forget the victims and their families. Ketchup is checking in. I think she's ditched South Florida for North Carolina. Hey, STS fam and best guest, Great Scott, and the one and only Fil Waters. Always a great start to the weekend. Thank you for the show from Candy. Shaq is here once again. Best show on YouTube. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. It's only because Fil and Scott are on. This looks like a new name, Cinderella. No, she's been here before, thanking us. So, a lot to go over here. I have a feeling that this is going to annoy you, Fil Waters, but in the Bryan Kohberger case, the judge, otherwise known as Judge, he just granted the defense their request, and that request is for police training records of 3 police officers who were behind his arrest, and they're doing this in a bid to challenge the police officers' credibility and reliability. You're a 33 or 34-year veteran of law enforcement. Does this get under your skin that they're taking this approach?
Before I answer that, the first thing I want to say is, Scott, I watched your case. Awesome. When I can watch those inner workings of excellent investigators and detectives working to get to that ultimate end, which is a successful prosecution, finding the right person who's done the wrong thing. It's always a great ending. So a great show. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. By the way, my son was asking about you guys. For those who don't know, after the show, my 4-year-old likes to pop on and say hello to these two guys. And out of the blue, a week later, he says, "When am I going to see those famous police officers again?" And I said, "Kid, only one of them was a police officer. The other one's an FBI agent. Get it straight." And he said, "What are you talking about?" But anyway, he was asking about you guys. So, Phil, back to Kohberger. They're going to try to go after the cops, it appears. Does it annoy you?
No, that's part of the drill. Look, again, the evildoer does not have to prove that he is not guilty. So the defense attorneys are doing what they are supposed to be doing, which is offering him the best defense he can. They're doing their due diligence. They're checking the boxes. And I'm not surprised at all that they're getting these training records. One of the first questions that was always asked of me when I got on the stand is what is the scope of your training? And I would, of course, I had over 3,000 hours of training in law enforcement, but I did not belabor that. I just kind of hit the high points of the different types of training that I'd had. So I'm not surprised at all. And the other side of that request is, you better be careful what you wish for. They may find out that because they're going after the officers that made the scene, that the initial patrol officers that got there. So, and what they're going for is, did they secure the scene properly? Was there any contamination at the scene that may have resulted from something that they did or they didn't do? So I get it, and I'm not annoyed by it. It's just part of the process.
Phil, did that worry you when you were a working homicide detective that, the patrol officers, the street guys could potentially screw up a scene for you somehow? Would you ensure when you arrived on scene that everything was copacetic? Did that ever, was that a constant worry of yours?
It was not a worry if there was something that I saw at the scene that had been, look, I had veteran cops, veteran harness bulls out there. I worked a shooting that ended up being referred to a grand jury because it was justifiable. The guy was breaking into a guy's house, and he used a shotgun to dispatch this person who was breaking into his bedroom window. And the senior officer at the scene, who I knew, I asked him, "Where is the weapon?" And he told me he had secured it in the trunk of his patrol car. And I kind of looked at him and I said, "Really? So you took the weapon off the scene and put it in your patrol car?" And he kind of looked at me like, "Oh yeah, I really stepped into that one, didn't I?" So things like that. And then we had a guy that, which was bizarre, but he would, at a shooting scene, he had a propensity for, I think I've talked about this before, for disassembling the weapon.
No, I don't think I've ever heard this.
Yeah, he would go to a scene of a shooting, and again, for securing the weapon purposes, instead of just securing the freaking scene and making sure nobody gets in there, he would take the weapon apart and leave it in a little pile where he found it. Well, you cannot go back and reinvent the wheel. You cannot reestablish that scene. So that part of the scene has been contaminated at that point. And the first time he did it, I just said, you need to not do that. Then he did it a second time, and I wasn't at the scene, but I got the phone call from the scene, and it was him, and he told me that he had done that again, and I just said, you got to quit doing that. That's insanity. You've got to quit. Nobody's impressed with your expertise in being able to disassemble and reassemble these weapons. So Yeah, I mean, but again, it wasn't a worry. If it was something that happened, regardless of what it was, then we just dealt with it and moved on.
Fil Waters, very quickly, because I have to get to Scott or I will get yelled at that I'm ignoring Scott, which I'm not. But when you were on the stand and the lawyer had the chutzpah to say, what are your credentials? You did not just say, do you not know who Detective Fil Waters is? You wouldn't say that? What's the matter with you?
I've never thought that much of myself, certainly. It was always, I just tell them what the background is, my training, my education, and experience, and very brief bio, and that was it.
There you go. Tali joining us from Israel. Hey, Joel, STS fam. We start with the Sassy Sunday, and now Fil and Scott, Looney Friday stories. Perfect. Thank you. My friend Mish in Cape Town, South Africa. Julie Frew in the UK. Holy moly, I've got the right day and the right time. Hey, STS Nation. It is confusing, I guess, when you're overseas, but get it straight, Julie. Pam Hart Young coming to us from Idaho, I believe. Best guest, best show. Facts. If you're here, hit the like button. Please do that. And Scott Duffy, your take on this. So the Latah County District Judge, John Judge, love the name, has granted legal permission to the defense team in this win to get these police training records. The officers' names are not being released. They say, the defense says, that these officers conducted critical interviews with witnesses and made decisions regarding the investigation. Really, only Fil Waters and you should be allowed to question anyone, but apparently these officers did. The defense offered up that they're quote unquote not on a fishing expedition. Scott Duffy, are they on a fishing expedition? What do you make of this, that they're trying to go after your people, law enforcement? Makes me angry, but go on.
Yeah, I could see how it makes you angry, but I agree with Phil. This is part of standard operating procedure. I would even go to say that the defense was not doing their most or their best or following up if they did not at least try to seek these records, much less try to get backgrounds or personnel. This was pretty common anytime we were going to, not beyond a grand jury, but if we were prepping for trial, I would get an official letter. It would go into my file, my personnel file. It would be from the prosecutor's office seeking anything that might be relevant or that can be what we call impeachable, right? So if I screwed up on the job, I did something that is totally irrelevant of the case, but it was something of a personnel matter. It could be possibly used as an to impeach the witness, so to speak. And you're going to do that with any witness that's not law enforcement. You're going to pull backgrounds. You're going to pull criminal records. Both defense and prosecutors are looking at their witnesses and then making a decision whether or not prosecution is going to call a certain witness. Prosecutors may say, hey, we're not going to call a particular law enforcement witness, perhaps because there is something in the personnel file or something lacking. And why offer that? But at the same time, that information is provided to defense. So it's not that it's held from the defense. It's just, hey, we're not going to use this witness. It's not necessary in the chronology of our events. And so be it. It allows the defense if they so choose it, but I've not seen where they would call upon a law enforcement witness. So I absolutely believe defense is doing due diligence because when you don't have, if you don't have a defense in the sense of we can defend our client because we can prove he wasn't there, didn't do this, didn't do that, it's not his DNA, whatever else the evidence is going to show, you go after the investigators. And we've seen that for some time.
And Scott Duffy, when you were called to testify and the defense would ask for your credentials, would you tell them to buzz off or would you give the credentials?
Yeah, and that was already provided. the standard is what's your name, who do you represent, and how many years in law enforcement, and that would pretty much I would say the standard, and this is in pretty much every search warrant or arrest warrant. I would give a paragraph of my credentials up to that point, including relevant training. So it would be, for example, I did 15 weeks in the police academy, and I did another 15 weeks in the FBI academy, and all that is inclusive of investigation 101, the law 101, etc. So yeah, it pretty much every trial that I had testified in, it was a go-to question. Give us your background.
By the way, STS Nation, I'd like you guys to weigh in on who has a snazzier shirt today, Fil Waters or Scott Duffy. My vote right out of the gate, sorry to say, Phil, is going to be Scott Duffy today. I like the dark blue with the spots, but let's see what STS Nation says.
Seagulls. These are
seagulls.
Seagulls.
Even better, a beach shirt, even though you're not at the beach, state today. Fil Waters, Jody Johnston says, I've rearranged my husband's dinner to watch the live today. That's how much I love you guys. Hypothetically, Phil, if your wife was a fan of this show and she changed your dinner time to watch it, would you be aggravated by that?
To watch me, or to watch somebody else, or to watch you?
Else. Yeah, to watch me. Would it aggravate you? Yes. No, let's say it was a totally different show.
I would probably go ahead and eat.
That's a good idea. Shout out to Lindsay from Jersey. Great answer so far. Whatever. So Phil, back to this, and your Wi-Fi is looking a little. It's always been so crisp. Today it's a little cloudy, but it's all good, Phil. As long as I can hear you. So state obviously came out and confirmed that they are going to seek the death penalty against the man you call the evildoer. And Kohberger's defense, in regard to asking about the information on these police officers, said, and I quote here, there is a heightened standard now that the state has announced its intent to seek the death penalty. And these, meaning the police training, is very relevant. They're very relevant pieces of information. I mean, beyond just the police investigation part of this, how much do things really ratchet up when you are dealing with a capital case? Do you know the number of capital cases that you were involved with, Phil, off the top of your head?
Oh, wow. I do not. I could look in my little book here and tell you. I'd have to count.
I mean, is it like 3? Is it a dozen? Is it 21?
Oh no, I was part of 9 cases that were ended up on death row. So there's 9 capital cases right there, and I mean, over 23 years, I'd have to go count them up.
By the way, this is funny. Michelle says, look at this. Fil and Scott are in the wrong places. My OCD cannot deal. It's good for you. It's exposure.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
We changed that last time this happened.
Should I do it, or should
we flipped it? You were able to flip it.
I should make.
I think you ought to because I'm a little weirded out about seeing Scott below me. That's a little.
Yeah. All right, hold on a second.
Scott up there above me.
I think we did
where most people put him. That's right.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Did that work? That didn't work. Same spot. Hold on.
There we go. There we go. Now Saint Scott is above me, where most of the haters would prefer him to be.
That's a good name, Saint Scott. I'm gonna invoke that one. So Phil, back to the show here. The death penalty. How much, for those of us who are not detectives with your history and background and experience, how much does it really impact the case in terms of being a capital case?
Well, in terms of the prosecution, it does intensify it because the goal is when it is a case. I'll just use some of mine as an example. The cases that ended up being death penalty cases were accompanied with confessions. And when that's the case, and those confessions, look, that's the most powerful piece of evidence that you can get is the defendant or the evildoer in that particular case has, in their own words, said what they did and then demonstrated what they did. That's very, very hard to overcome. So most of those capital cases, the point of the defense is to save them from being executed or be rehabilitated, as I say. And so the focus becomes not a question of guilt, not guilty or guilty. It becomes, we're going to try to save this person's life. And so that becomes the focus. And that way, the defense attorney can get focused on what the purpose here is. And so there are two considerations when a death penalty case comes forward that the jury has to consider. Are there any mitigating circumstances behind the event itself? And is this person a further threat to the public, to society? And those things have to be considered when assessing the death penalty. So it is a more, I guess, from the perspective of the defense and from the prosecution, I mean, it is just a more intense process because of the nature of the case itself and being tried as a death penalty case versus a non-death capital.
Phil, if my ears do not deceive me, I think I just heard two cock-a-doodle-doos. Am I hearing this right? In the background, in the distance?
Yeah, that would be the roosters that live behind us here that have not quite figured out. You know, they start that crap. You know, they start that crap at dawn, and of course they're out there crowing, and and then they spend the rest of the day strutting around, thinking that they're the ones that caused the sun to rise. So they're now out furthering what they thought they did this morning. So that's the
I should listen to that cock-a-doodle-doo. It's crazy. By the way, I have to ask, where is Nugget right now? Napping right behind you, as per usual?
Nugget? Yeah, well, she just heard her name. Okay, all right, Nugget. She was on the nap here. Here she comes. Come here, Nugget. Come here, little.
There we go.
There you go. Okay, she heard you say her name and she looked up. And
What's
so
up,
here
Nugget?
she is. Here's Nugget today. Nugget's
What's up,
here.
Nugget? I have an interesting dog story. Let me tell you my story today, Phil and Scott. Scott, do you have a dog?
I do. Yeah.
I think I asked you. What's
yeah,
your
you
dog?
did ask. It's a white Pyrenees mix.
The dead dog pillow, right? Wasn't that?
That's
The
my
dead dog pillow, Scott?
my dead dog. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
The dead dog.
My
pillow.
first rescue.
So today yours truly is home all alone. Kids are away. Wife went to pick up daughter from sleepaway camp, and I was in the shower. And when I come out, Miami, the weather moves fast, and there is a lightning and thunderstorm. And to my chagrin, I had realized I left Ethel Bug Johnson, that is her full name, outside. We have a fenced-in yard. Ethel's a boxer, and she's 2, and she has the vertical leap of Michael Jordan on steroids, so she can jump. And I guess she got scared. I came out of the shower. I hearkened for Ethel, and no one came. And she sometimes hides. Lo and behold, this usually happens anytime I go away. The running joke is the chief technical officer has a major disaster. There was actually one time in Washington, D.C., where half of the SWAT unit showed up at my home in DC. That's an entire show. My wife was scantily clad. The SWAT team stayed there for a very long time. That's a completely. But today, I come out. Ethel is gone. This time it's on me. I literally go get in my car to drive around the neighborhood, and sure enough, police officer in his SUV is coming down the street, and he had Ethel in custody. He had her in custody. He had her by the collar. She had jumped over the fence, and he returned her to me in one piece. I gave her a kiss, and then I smacked her on her behind, and all is well in the world. Michelle is watching us from South Africa, and Valerie Kerr is cock-a-doodle-doing that she made a live. Phil, you should really change your text message from a bozo horn to a cock-a-doodle-doo. That's my recommendation. But I digress. Scott Duffy, the prosecution during all of this back and forth said that they have already handed over because they were getting pressure from the defense. So they said, look, we've given you 10,000 tips and 51 terabytes of audio and video information. How much is that? You've handled so many cases. Is this like an inordinate amount of information? How do you even go through 10,000 tips and 51 terabytes of audio and video? It seems like something you would take a couple of years to sift through from an investigative standpoint. How, number one, is it a lot? Number two, how do you comb through it all?
That's a lot of information, and 10,000 tips, depending on how long those tips could be, they could be, several pages per tip. So that's a lot. And, but it's good for the prosecution, turn it over and let them sift through it, whatever. So my guess is they're going to be requesting additional funding for assistance in going and analyzing the data they have. But, at the same time, it could be information that has nothing to do with the case. It could be every imaginable complaint that's, hey, my dog barked, or, the sky lit up with fireworks. But it does sound like a lot of information, and it will take time to go through.
Well, Julie Frew, I did not know this, from the UK. Joel, can we have a big shout out from Marina Archetype, who's always here, who's gone through a lot due to an incident in London yesterday? Let her know her SGS family is with her. We are with her, and I hope she's doing well. If she is in custody, I'll have to get Fil Waters and Scott Duffy on it, but hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully she is okay, and please keep us informed and let us know. Fil Waters, I know your answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. The judge decided to extend the gag order, to continue the gag order to both law enforcement and investigators. That came up during last week's hearing. He doesn't want anyone talking. Do you support that? I think you do.
Yes.
Good answer. Let's move it along now.
That was a yes. On that?
You don't, unless you want to. You don't need to. No, it's a great answer. I love that.
No. I mean, that there's wisdom in that. I think the judge is right on about that, and they don't want this thing, as much as it already has been, they don't want to try it in the public square, in the public arena.
By the way, it is the skies are opening up once again. So if you don't see Surviving the Survivor, you'll know that it's Florida's weather. Some things we don't have power over. Could be the man above that cuts this show short today, but hopefully that does not happen. Look at this brunch with Carm. Tali said, "Thank God it's Israel time, so she doesn't have to be up till 2 a.m. Hello, STS. Did they have a secret hearing yesterday on the 6th? I don't know. I think I had read something about that. If anyone has information on that, please let me know. Ketchup points out, Joel looking a little more bronze there. I've been stuck out in the sun here in Miami where it's 197 degrees. So I finally have turned the corner from red into a little brownish. That takes like 9 months of me being in the sun for that to happen, but it has finally happened. Scott Duffy, this is right in your wheelhouse. Not only did they go after the police during the latest court hearing, unless they had a secret one yesterday, the defense also asked for additional information about the FBI team who provided cell phone records used in the probable cause affidavit. So now they're going after the feds too in terms of the defense. Any shock there, and any thoughts about why, and it relates to phone records specifically?
Yeah, so we know the FBI provided a lot of assistance with regards to the cell phone, cell towers analysis, right? To get to be able to track the phone and place the phone at different relevant spots, especially the time leading up to the homicide, right? So no, it doesn't surprise me. I actually just took it for granted that when they are going after law enforcement's personnel records and training, that meant any law enforcement officer involved with the case, from the first officer on the scene to every relevant investigator that may or may not have written a report, a supplemental, whatnot, to have given to this case. So that extends to the FBI, to state and every local agency, including university, campus police. So it's no, it's part of the job. You know that if you're offering assistance to a case and you put your name anywhere on a report, that you could be called to testify.
Kim Schofield is saying hi from Utah, and this one's important. I'll tell you why. First time from Hungary, from Max Chronicler, and I think I mentioned this, and it's stressing me out because it's both good and bad. But Carm, with the loss of my father, my mother said, you've never seen my hometown, where she had to hide during the war, and I'm finishing up this book. And so she graciously offered to invite me and my wife and my 3 little children. So we are actually going to be going to Hungary and then to Serbia we're here all next week and a day or two the following week. And then I'm going to be gone until August 1st. And that's stressing me out because I don't want to come back and see 3 people watching the show. That's part of why I had Fil on and why I'm doing these Surviving My Biggest Cases. So I'm still getting you guys some quality shows, but this is a once in a lifetime thing. I have never seen Carm's birthplace. She's going to take me to, she was hidden during the war. She's going to show me that. She's going to show me where she was liberated in Budapest. Phil's a big fan of history, so I'm going to witness it with my own eyes. Not to get deep and crazy and whatever, but when I said Budapest, so my mother, after she was in hiding and after she reunited with my mother, they went running off to Budapest, which they were actually in Yugoslavia, Budapest, of course, in Hungary, and the Russians liberated them. And prior to being liberated, they had absolutely no food. So my grandmother would have to go out during these bombardments, and there would be dead horses laying on the cobblestone streets. And my grandmother would have to slice off pieces of the horse in order to eat. And that is what they ate. That's a little glimmer into what this book is about. But that is what I'm going to do. So, I'll keep you guys updated. Didn't want to depress anyone with any stories about eating horse meat. It's the last thing on earth I'd want to do. And there's 2 of them standing outside Phil's house. So I hope they earmuff themselves for that conversation. Shout out once again here to LA Not So Confidential.
My daughter-in-law has Hungarian heritage. And her father is Hungarian, and he goes to Hungary on a regular basis, and Budapest is a beautiful city. I'd like to go there one day myself. So, yeah,
Phil, one day I would like to go there with you and Scott. We should do a live from Budapest. No, I hear Budapest is amazing. It's beautiful. So I'm excited. I'm excited, but SGS Nation, Stay with us, man. I don't want to come back to 3 subscribers. Stay with me. Anyway, on we go here. Fil Waters, the house, 1122 King Road. So the owner, he donated it after this to the university. The university now wants to tear it down. The Gonzalez family, and I believe a couple others, maybe 2 other of the families came out. But the Gonzalez family specifically said the university asked for the family's opinions on the demolition and then proceeded to ignore those opinions and pursue their own self-interest. How important, from an evidentiary standpoint, Fil Waters, is it to keep this house up? And from a jury standpoint, in case they want to do a walkthrough here.
I don't know at this point that it makes any difference. The only thing I would see is the defense wanting to walk the jury through the house, and that would be a defense issue. I don't see anything to be gained with the prosecutors of doing that, and I think they've got certainly enough evidence. They kept that house secure for weeks, and now they've gleaned every piece of evidence that can be taken out of it. And as Scott's already mentioned, we've got this thing with these 3 officers, and I think these are the 2 or 3 that initially made the scene and talking to witnesses and that kind of thing to address that. They did exactly what they were trying to do, what they're supposed to do. That's the only way that we get information as homicide detectives to make those scenes is when we get that call. We're going to first meet with the patrol officer, the primary unit that made that scene, to discuss who they've talked to in terms of witnesses and so forth and so on, and what those people say. So, this stuff about what the defense is trying to go for here, I think it's not going to bear anything that's going to be particularly significant. But in terms of the house itself, the Goncalveses, they've always got the other argument for not doing something or doing something. So, look, I don't think there's any evidentiary value left in that structure. And the only thing that I would see happening is the defense wanting to walk the jury through that structure for whatever purpose. So, I don't. If we were in Las Vegas, I'd call it a push.
Danielle Malley, hello from Boca Raton, my favorite show of the week. Danielle, I don't know if I've ever seen you before, so welcome to the show. And Spanish is not my strong suit, but the chief technical officer is fluent. And it occurred to me the other day that Boca Raton means mouth of the rat. And I asked my wife about that, and she says, in fact, it does. But my wife, who was born in LA, said, in English, it never occurred to me either, but it does mean mouth of the rat. So there you go, Boca Raton. Tali, I'm very glad you asked this. This is for Fil Waters. Did you watch the Peterson verdict? It was a good one, very emotional. He is the Parkland school officer, acquitted on all counts. Fil Waters was not happy to see him charged and on trial, and he was he walked out of the courthouse a free man. Phil, what do you think? What say you?
I was ecstatic. I was so proud of that jury seeing through this politically motivated, emotionally based prosecution that was in error from the very beginning. That was those prosecutors ought to be ashamed of themselves, that office. And so I was ecstatic. Now the other side of that coin is, where does Deputy Peterson go to get his good name and his reputation back?
Probably nowhere, but
well,
he was acquitted.
I mean, the point is, you can't unring that bell, and there are going to be people from now to the second coming that are going to believe that he was guilty of something in that incident, and that's I saw one of the fathers. Look, and thoughts and prayers to those families that were affected so greatly by that. But I saw one of the fathers in that courtroom that testified, and when they came back with the verdicts, that he's sitting there shaking his head. And I'm thinking, what in the world are you thinking? The person that did what they did has been found guilty, and they're spending the rest of their life in prison. That should have been a death penalty case. That guy should be sitting on death row.
Let me tell you, that
woman did what they did.
Yeah, that guy should be permanently rehabilitated, but the jury made their decision.
I don't even. I really. It's hard for me to understand what they think, what more they think they're getting by prosecuting and persecuting this deputy that was on site there trying to find a way to protect those children. And to suggest that he had anything to do with that is just wrong. So, yeah, I was, but to answer the question, I was ecstatic. Thought that was awesome.
Kim is commenting what we're all thinking. It's been a crazy week in the world of crime, and I've been looking forward to Great Scott all week, and there he is in his seagull shirt. And this is we're now moving off of Kohberger onto Rudy Farias. Scott, I don't know what you know about Rudy Farias. Looks like I'm catching you off guard, which I love, but this is a wacky, crazy story. Rudy Farias, his full name is Rudolph. He's now a 25-year-old man. He was reported missing 8 years ago, Scott Duffy. But it turns out he's been living with his mother the entire time. Details are still coming forth, but Houston police, Fil Waters, said that Farias was not missing between the time frame of the missing. I just said a P instead of M. It's the way this is going. Oh my God. By the way, I was once on Fox in New York, and instead of saying pawn shop, I said porn shop. I don't know what was on my mind. Never got more emails in my life. So I'm sure instead of missing and I said pissing, I will get a lot of emails today. But it got a laugh out of Phil. So there you go. By the way, my dad, anytime something crazy like that would happen, his rationale. So my dad was such a smart man. He said, if you were humiliated or embarrassed, he said, look at it the other way. You gave someone a good laugh. I just gave Fil Waters a good laugh right there. So there you go. Anyway, details are still coming forward, but the Houston PD says that this guy Farias was not missing. Scott Duffy, any initial thoughts before I go any further? Because there's some stuff that sort of gets revealed here, and it is disturbing. But what about the fact that, how can someone go allegedly missing for 8 years, since 2015, only to be discovered to not be missing? Shouldn't the Houston Police Department have known that he wasn't still missing? That's where I got confused right off the top. What do you make of this?
Yeah, so was anybody looking for him? So who's he missing from? Like, if he's living with his mother and his mother is not going to report him missing.
Yeah. So this
Did
story,
he have a wife or a girlfriend or somebody in his life?
Well, let's go down the list of information here. So on March 7th, 2015, he was then 17 years old. He went missing while he was walking two of his dogs. Investigators said that he was experiencing depression, and he had seen his brother die right in front of him. I don't know the circumstances of that death. But recently, in late June of this year, he was found sleeping in front of an East Houston church. And then his family released a statement saying that, quote unquote, a good Samaritan located him unresponsive and immediately called police and 911. When he was found, he was nonverbal. He was supposed to be taken to the hospital, but he refused and then was left in the care of his family. And his mother, Fil Waters, says her name is Janie Santana, said that her son was, quote unquote, receiving the care he needs to overcome his trauma. Phil, this is a very weird story. Again, there's sort of a bombshell twist that we're coming to, but what do you make of this so far, Fil Waters? And this is your not your hometown, because Tulsa is your hometown, but your adopted hometown of Houston.
Well, those guys, I have not spoken to any of my contacts and missing persons about this case, but just what I'm reading and the statements that have been made by I think by HPD, the whole thing sounds to me to be, for whatever reasons, some sort of attention-getting something or other that started 8 years ago. And the only reason it gets exposed is because he's found unconscious at a church. And all of a sudden everybody goes, well, this is the guy that's been missing for 8 years, and now we've got this stuff coming. I think I read somewhere where he was supposedly sexually. I mean, you talk about every ism in the book. Now this applies to this guy. And then you've got the mother, apparently.
Yeah, but Fil Waters, let me ask you this. When someone goes missing, like, what's the protocol? Like, did the police occasionally come by to see if he's still missing? They just take it at face value? Was there any issue, in your opinion, here with the investigation potentially?
No, those missing person cases, the first thing they're going to look into, especially a kid this age, and look, 17 in the state of Texas is the date, is the age of adulthood. So he still living at home and so forth and so on. I'm sure that it was looked into the aspect of whether he's a runaway. Those things possibly eliminated. The thing about the dogs showing up and he was with them and he's not with them now, and he was depressed and so forth and so on. I'm sure the missing persons would consider the fact that he may have gone off somewhere and committed suicide, that kind of thing. So all those things are considered. But let me tell you what, there are a lot of missing person cases that are reported. There's not enough manpower or time to look into all of those cases to the extent that they're checking on them daily, weekly, whatever. And in a case like this, where technically he's an adult, if he just made the decision that he just didn't want to be found, which has happened, then that's the case. And there's not really anything. And if there are no affirmative links, or if there are no active leads that give these missing persons detectives something to follow up on, well, then it ends and they move on to the next one. And it becomes, at some point, the responsibility of the reportees, which in this case are going to be his mom, I believe. I think that's the one that initially reported all this, or the family. They're the ones that are responsible for letting detectives know that, guess what? He's not missing anymore. And apparently that's not what happened here. So this thing was kept hidden from the detectives.
I assume it's once you report someone missing, and if they come back and you don't inform police, is that a crime? Fil Waters' Wi-Fi is a little.
I don't know that. I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I don't believe it is. But the thing about it is, if when these people are a bona fide missing person case, they are entered into NCIC, TCIC. They're entered into databases that are nationwide. And so if that person, they come across that person somewhere, anywhere in the country, and they're identified and they're run, they will come up as a missing person. So it's not like it just happens in a vacuum and they're reported missing and then the detectives do what they do and then they move on. They do all the things they can do to put this person up where there's some visibility if that person is found. So this whole thing here, though, appears to me, and I'm just reading what I've read about it, is that for whatever reason, this mother or this family decided that they were going to stick with this story when he showed up, whenever he did finally show up, and they decided to not report him found. And so I think the term that I saw in one of the newspaper articles was he's been hiding in plain sight for 8 years. And there are apparently other people around that knew it. And again, he doesn't get exposed or found until he is found, passed out at some church somewhere. So
And
that's what exposed all of this.
I think there might be a reason for that, Scott, which we're going to get to. First, Davina says Snazzy Scott wins. Davina's on my side. Look at this. This is shaking me to the core in a good way. Tara Wells says, my husband is getting pizza tonight because I can't miss the show. We are literally altering men's lives because of this show. Proud to be a part of that. Good to hear, Tara. I like pizza. I hope your husband enjoys his pizza tonight. By the way, Phil, in Texas, you become an adult at 17. Jews are pretty smart people, but, I became a man when I was 13 in Jewish tradition with my bar mitzvah. At 13 years old, I think I was 4'9". Didn't have a hair on my body. I had feathered hair parted in the middle. That's when they claimed I was a man. Maybe because in biblical times you matured a little faster, but I should not have been declared a man at 13, Phil. I'm not sure that I should be declared one today, but here I am nevertheless. Look at this. Scott is...
Well, the big difference there is, but the big difference there is, Joel, you're a Jew. You're Jewish. You're raised in that nation. So yes. I would not go discounting certainly the heritage of the Jewish nation, going back to Isaac, and I've been to a lot of when you were a bar mitzvah. Yeah, I've been to several. I've had several friends. I've had friends of mine. I've been to their sons. I've been to bat mitzvahs for the girls. So you're comparing apples to oranges there in terms of a legal law that says a man's law that says 17 is in the state of Texas, because it varies around the country.
Yes, and
it doesn't vary within Judaism. So 13 is the age, and if I were you, I would be very comfortable with that.
Phil, have you been to Israel, Fil Waters? If there's anyone in this world that would love Israel, it would be you. You would be obsessed with the history there.
My wife and I have talked about going to the Holy Land for the last 10 years. We even were set up to go, and there were some circumstances that occurred. In fact, our church in Magnolia in Texas is going to the Holy Land this fall, and we just are, the timing's just not right. So yes, that is our ultimate destination on travel. We've traveled all through Europe and so forth and so on. So, but yeah, we definitely want to go to the Holy Land.
Well, Phil, I'm going to be there next summer once again, and I have a tour guide there for you, who's a former Israeli military commander. So I'm going to formally invite you. We'll talk about this off air, and he will take you.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah,
that would be awesome.
Yeah, he's about 90 years old now, but he's strong as an ox. He's an architect. He has developed many of the towns in Israel, and he fought. I don't even want to go here. He he fought in the Battle of Jenin, which there's a battle going on there today in the West Bank. But he fought there in 1967. I was just having a conversation with him, and he is a fascinating guy. And his best friend is a Arab Israeli whose name is Mustafa. Mustafa was a Mossad agent. This guy has a very fascinating life. But we'll discuss that a little bit more offline. But
67,
anyway.
that's the 67. That's the 6-Day War, right? 7-Day War. 67?
Correct. 6-Day War. Yep. And 72, 70. Charlie would know this better than me. It was the Yom Kippur War. Yes, both very brutal wars. Look at this. Tali's right here. Where is Nugget? She just saw him. I'm delayed on the comments here. Scott. Oh boy, there's thunder and lightning. Scott Duffy. So continuing with the Rudy Farias story here. So we'll do lives next summer from Budapest and Jerusalem, Scott and Phil. But until then, this guy Rudy Farias. It turns out now police say that Rudy Farias had actually returned home one day after he was reported missing in 2015. One day. But for 8 years, they thought he was gone. Officers say that the case is still under investigation. This is the curveball, Scott Duffy. So now this guy, Rudy Farias, would only interview with law enforcement with a local activist in Houston, a guy named Quanell X. Have you ever heard of this guy, Fil Waters? He's a local Houston. Do you know him?
Yeah.
No?
Oh, yeah. Quanell the 10th, yeah.
You know him? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We dealt with Quanell. He's a local activist, Nation of Islam, that kind of stuff. Yeah, Quanell.
So anyway, he would, for whatever reason, Scott Duffy, and I should probably get myself in trouble here. For whatever reason, this guy, Rudy Farias, would only speak to police with Quanell present. And what Quanell told police about Rudy Farias is that he had been sexually abused, which is no joke, and drugged for years. And it was his mother. She would ask him, Quanell said, to play daddy. She told him that he had to be the husband, and that is allegedly why he ran away. Quanell said, I never heard of a mother doing this to a child, what this woman did, and says that boy needs to go to the best drug rehab and best psychological mental health facility we can find for him. He's a good kid. That kid was just severely abused. So Scott Duffy, I mean, this kind of starts to come into focus now, right? Because this is probably why the mom didn't want investigators to know. And at the same time, this guy is probably looking for a way out. This takes a pretty twisted turn. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are cases, obviously the Menendez case comes to mind where the mother, Kitty, is alleged to have abused the children. But sexually, that's a whole different ballgame. Scott Duffy, what do you make of this?
Boy, I'm still confused. So mother was the reporting party on missing.
Yes.
And so he should have just left and kept on going, but then he comes back.
And that's a great point. The mom, as far as I know, did report him missing, but the mom is also allegedly abusing him. So would that make sense? And then she's also allegedly the one not saying that he's coming back. So I don't know. I'm lost at this point.
My thought is she continuing her abuse through the years? And of course, he becomes an adult male, but I'm not sure where his mind is in a mental capacity. So, I've seen people report other people missing, and then, for one reason or another, either because somebody was alleged to have committed a crime, and so thereby they need to disappear, so the police don't keep showing up at your door to keep looking for this now fugitive. But this sounds like a victim who's reported missing, but then returns to the scene of the crime. So I'm still where's the
well, so let me tell you a little more about what Quanell had to say. Quanell says she, the mother,
By
convinced.
Joel.
Yes, sir.
Joel,
Yes, sir.
Joel, by the way, Quanell's name is Ralph. But anyway.
Ralph. Out of respect
Ralph.
to Quanell, I will refer to him as Quanell X. Fil Waters, I'll let you refer to him as Ralph. I don't want to get sued or get beat up. But Quanell X went on and he said about Rudy Farias, Scott Duffy. The quote continues. She convinced him, Rudy, that he was in trouble for initially running away and that law enforcement wanted to arrest him and put him in jail for running away. She had convinced him that all types of agencies were looking for him to put him in jail. So it sounds like she was playing mind games too.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of this. It goes on to say that police obviously have their doubts with one officer out of Houston. Do you know a Lieutenant Christopher Zamora, Fil Waters?
I do know some Zamoras. That may be a son of the.
Well, he said Lieutenant Christopher Zamora said that Rudy was not missing during the 8-year period. He made contact with patrol officers out on the street. However, during these contacts, fictitious names and dates of birth were given, again, misleading officers, and Rudy would remain missing. A neighbor said he used to come to my garage, chill with my cousin, son, and daughter. That boy was never missing. And then the mother, Fil Waters, had identified her own son as her nephew. What's going on here, Phil? I have no idea what's going on here.
Well, I think you've hit on something. It sounds to me, and this is just based on what we've talked about here, the newspaper articles that I've read, and I did read what Quanell said, and it would appear that, letting evidence lead me where we need to be, that there is some sort of an incestuous relationship going on here. To what degree, we don't know, but there's this young man now, it sounds like, has been egregiously manipulated by his mother for her own purposes. So it sounds disgusting whichever way it goes.
Does somebody ever recover from this, Phil, do you think? When it's your own mother?
Well, I think to say they recover from it, that's a pretty general term. I would couch it in more of a sense that there hopefully will come a time where they have dealt with it and been able to move on from it. I don't know that there's ever what I would call a recovery. I think it certainly is going to change their lives forever and ever. Amen. And what you hope for is that this young man can put his life back together. And because we don't know, I did read somewhere where he had been sexually abused. So this may be the mother that's doing this, and that we don't know when that started.
Yeah.
And it appears that that kind of thing may be continuing. So, but I don't know that anyone ever recovers, to use that word. I think they hopefully get to a point where they're able to deal with it and move on with their lives.
Pam Hart Young, Phil getting deluged with questions here. Hi, Joel. My daughter lives in Moscow with my grandson. I'm in North Carolina. She says they need to leave the house alone until, by the way, this is back to Kohberger, obviously. Leave the house alone until someone is convicted. Question for Maui man Phil. It's not in Maui, but I like that name. I like the alliteration. With what is known, is he the guy? Is Kohberger the guy, Phil, with what you know?
I would say the evidence at this point in time tells me that he is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Tolly says, Phil, and we could ask Scott this one as well, obviously. Have you ever worked a crime scene that was described as being very brutal and messy and no DNA was found? Aside from the sheath, is it even possible to not leave anything? Were you surprised there was no DNA, at least none that we know of? Although there was some other male DNA, but Phil, your response to Tolly's inquiry.
Oh, I've had scenes that I was surprised that we didn't get any DNA. I've had scenes where we've got the DNA, but it's not an identifiable profile. I've had scenes where I've had DNA where the profile, excuse me, a partial profile, but it was not suitable for entering the CODIS. So I've had all forms of that type of thing. So the short answer is yes. And was I surprised? No.
Scott Duffy, your answer to this question?
Yes, right. It's not. I guess I've seen it where there's. I'm trying to figure out the best way to answer this. It comes down to DNA is an awesome thing. It is unique. It places you at the scene, or at least a transfer from a victim to another scene, and so forth. But it all comes down to if this individual is masked and gloved, and he does not suffer a cut. So I mean, I can maybe sweat, but you're talking about let's just say, to understand, the victims here have suffered brutal stabbings, so there's lots of bodily fluids and whatnot. But for the individual, if he catches them off guard and suffers no wound, I can see why they wouldn't find his DNA. At least from what we're being told, there could be something, obviously, with the gag order that there is DNA. But let's just assume at the end, when it all comes out, that there wasn't any further DNA other than what has been reported on the sheath. I mean, it's not surprising, especially if he's does not suffer a wound and there's not this profuse blood or some other bodily fluid. Touch DNA, which is you touch something, is not always right, and you have to be very specific as to, and that's where you have video cameras. For example, I'll just take a bank robbery's video. And so forensics is going to come in and watch the video, because they're not just going to swab the whole bank. They're going to look at the video and see where exactly the person had physical contact with anything, and then go to those specific items. So if you have no video in the house, you're not just taking a paint roller that's collecting everything off the walls and carpet and floors. So no, it would not surprise me. It would not change, to me, the dynamic of the prosecution. So,
Here's an astute observation from Gabrielle Scholes. I'm sensing a little tension between Phil and the Rooster, followed by Nugget, followed by Nugs, followed by Hey Nugget. As you can tell, I lag behind here. Phil, I'd love a quick response to this one here from Aunt Clara before we go on to a different case. The only evidence we know of has been proven suspicious. The DNA is transfer DNA. It's quite easy to be set up. This is the Kohberger. Is that an accurate statement, Fil Waters? Would it be easy to set up Bryan Kohberger here?
Well, that goes to easy to set him up. I mean, what would be the motive? I mean, I'm not going to answer that as a closed-ended answer, because that hypothesis, I don't even agree with the with what the question is. I mean, it's yeah, if there was a big conspiracy and all of a sudden you got all the cops and all the agents and all the detectives from the state, we all got together and we had this huge conspiracy and we set up Bryan Kohberger. That's insanity. I mean, that really is. These big conspiracy things that come about with cases like this, and I've had them, they always end up boiling down to something very simple. And that's what's going to happen here. So getting into the weeds about DNA and all this other stuff, because this is going to be one of these big picture cases, and it's going to be the sum of the evidence, of all of the evidence that is going to get him convicted. It will be the sum of the evidence. And if the prosecution presents that evidence in the way that they should and shows to the jury that he is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, then that will be the outcome. So everybody kind of needs to hold back here a little bit. Let's see if it goes to trial. Let's see what's presented at trial, and let's see what the final verdict is. But to take one piece of evidence and say that all of a sudden it's a setup and it was planted and all this other stuff, I mean, that makes for a good television show, I guess, but that's just not, at least in my experience, that's not reality. In regards to the rooster, the tension is not between me and the rooster, it's between my wife and the rooster. She really does not like the rooster.
You know,
it doesn't bother me. I could care less. I don't.
Phil, you've taught me that any person under the right circumstances, or actually the wrong circumstances, commit a evil crime. I hope your wife does not go out and give that rooster the ultimate punishment. I hope that does not happen.
Well, she suggested that I do something about it, but I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to be a co-defendant in any kind of proceeding that might result in the demise of that rooster.
As I like to say, Phil, roosters are people too. Please be kind to the rooster. It breathes air just like you. Squeaky Wheel says the little chihuahua is ready to tear into an ankle at the drop of a hat. That would be Nugs, followed by, I love this name, Sneaky Freeloading O2 Breather. Hi from Cornwall, UK. Made Alive, it's late there, whatever time that is. And Ethel, no. Yeah, she is back. There was something that I just forgot that I wanted to bring up that I didn't bring up. Lorna says, poor Ethel. Lindsay Shea says, Ethel was my grandmother's name. Precisely why I named her Ethel. She kind of looks like an old lady. And when you try to get her out of your spot in your own bed, she looks at you like you're out of your mind. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Fil Waters just shared some amazing photos with me when he was in undercover narcotics from the 80s, I believe, early 90s. Fil Waters, do I have permission to share those on Instagram?
Sure.
The Instagram handle is Surviving the Survivor. I will put a couple of those out. I don't want to give you, this is a spoiler alert. He had an amazing mullet, an unbelievable mullet, and he looked like a drug guy. Yeah. It's good. The photos are unreal.
A lot of dope. Sold a lot of dope. Oh, yeah.
Joel, we are calling PPS, Puppers Protective Services. I need to get a higher fence, and it's a pretty high fence. Scott, look at this. We have a Pyrenees Lab mix, best dog ever from Beth Bergman. All dogs are awesome. Watching from Vancouver, watching from the, am I reading this right? The Ponderosa Ranch in Utah. I'd like to go to the Ponderosa Ranch in Utah. Moving on to this next story, Scott Duffy. This is a former ballerina charged with second-degree murder for the death of her husband. She argued it happened in self-defense, and of course it happened in Florida, my state, with a stand-your-ground rule. Ashley Benefield is her name. This has been dubbed the Black Swan trial. She's accused of murdering Douglas Benefield in her Florida bedroom on September 27, 2020. They met at a dinner party, Scott Duffy. By the way, there's no real twist or turn in here, and I don't really know the relevance other than this is a pretty popular story right now, and I wanted to get your take. But the husband was 54. He lost his wife to some illness and met Ashley. She was 24. Do the math. That's 30-year difference. He said that age hardly mattered, quote unquote. This is, I don't know whose quote this is. This is a writer who interviewed, I guess the husband at one point, said that he just immediately thought that Ashley was the most beautiful, the most amazing person in the world. She calls a neighbor, and the neighbor says that they received a 911 call from one of Ashley's neighbors. She had gone over to the neighbor, said that she had been attacked by her husband and shot him. She used a .45. But then, Scott Duffy, and we'll drop this last nugget and let you take it from there. Based on the entry wounds on Douglas, it does not appear that he was facing Ashley when she began shooting. It also does not appear that Douglas had taken any kind of defensive or combative stance. After being shot, Douglas fell to the ground, and it appears that he may have struck his head on the wall on the way down. They met in 2016. They married 13 days later. The first wife had passed. She became pregnant right after the wedding and moves to Florida to live with her mother. They had been living in Charleston. Douglas comes down to Florida. That's when this happens. I'll stop right there. Is your radar going up here at all? Do you think that she was attacked in self-defense, especially considering that he had his back to her, according to reports?
Yeah, without seeing the evidence pictures, I just as you're reading some of the particulars, there are some red flags that are popping up in my head. But I would have I would like to see, just what the crime scene tells. A crime scene, was it staged? And if it wasn't, what so she provides an interview. She provides details of her account. There's only one side to be told here, since only one party is living. But good evidence collection and documentation of the scene can tell otherwise. And so I would put the two and two together. It would, if she was willing to be interviewed, it almost sounds like she provided a statement, right? Because it's a self-defense, so she's saying what she wants to say. But right away, I'm thinking, okay, so it's a pretty quick relationship turned marriage. The years of difference, well, it all depends what's in her background. So I would like to do a victimology. I would like to do figure out where she came from, how she arrived in the picture, and I would be very interested to see any previous documentation of assaults or fights or the police coming to do a domestic. And then I would like to see how much money is in life insurance in her name. So those are going through my head as you're talking about this case.
Spoken like a true investigator, right? That's always the life insurance. Ketchup says, thank you, Ketchup. It would be a great experience for you and the entire family. Lorna says, you will like Budapest. I bet you I will. Look at this. This almost brings a tear to my eye. We will still be here for you, Joel. I hope so. I don't want to lose STS Nation. Sally says that will be an awesome experience. That's such a good trip. Maui Swift, one of the OGs, says, how exciting, Joel. Fil Waters, back to the Black Swan trial. Detectives like yourself said that after learning she was pregnant, Ashley began making allegations against Douglas. She also filed complaints against him in the months leading up to his death. The judge, however, during an injunction hearing, advised that she did not find Ashley's story to have a quote-unquote scintilla of truth and ordered Douglas, the husband, to have full access to the child for visitation. Ashley, at that point, had apparently exhausted all legal means of keeping the child away. Have we just come to a motive in a murder here, Fil Waters?
Well, I think so, just based on what you shared. I'm in agreement with Scott. I mean, there's a lot of background stuff here we need to look at about her and about him and the nature of that relationship and how it got started and then where it progressed to. It sounds to me like she's just I'll use that technical term that we used to use in homicide. She was a nut. She continued to be a nut, and she's ended up being a nut, which has cost the life of her husband and father of the children. So, yeah, there's I've looked at I guess it's her mugshot. She's got as much as a picture can tell. She's got a different look on her face of a person that's kind of got something going on there. If the eyes are the windows of the soul, there's something going on there back there somewhere. And so who knows? But what I've read about the case, the judge is spot on about her just being the likelihood is that she's a pathological liar. She believes her own bull crap and uses that to justify the sociopathic behavior. And that I have read, there's no evidence that she was killing him in self-defense. So I think she's going to have a rough road to hoe.
This is a great idea from Copper Horse, who tweets out our show links, which I love. You could do some walkabout streams if you can get cell service, Joel, and share some of your trip with us. I will definitely do that. I will get you not only a stream, but midstream of Carm yelling at me for something when I'm overseas, which undoubtedly will happen. So I will definitely do that. I love this comment because I will make this happen too. Joel, can we get signed copies of the book at the STS merch store, limited edition and such? I will be happy to do that, and I'll have to talk to the chief technical officer about it. So that's it with the Black Swan woman. She actually just had a stand your ground hearing and didn't catch what came of that. But if anyone here happens to know, that is the default defense here in Florida, I guess, for situations like this. We will see how it plays out in a court of law. But Scott Duffy, we've covered this story before. You will know this one well. You might not remember the name. Matthew Nilo. He is the New Jersey lawyer who is now accused of being a Boston serial rapist. He was attacking women when he was 19, 20 years old, according to police, back in 2000 and 2008. He's now been charged with 5 more sex attacks. By the way, this guy bonded out not long ago. I think it was $500,000. But he had already been charged in 3 attacks, and now he's charged with 5 more. There was a 8th person that he failed to attack successfully. So he's accused of trying to attack 8. 7 of them he actually raped and assaulted. Does it surprise you, Scott Duffy, to find out that a guy who we covered, a month ago had raped and attacked 3 women is now being charged for raping and attacking 8 women? Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me. And kudos to law enforcement everywhere. And I don't know if those additional cases are different places or all stemming from the same jurisdiction he had left. But no, this is exactly once you've identified somebody and, the case the case gets stronger when law enforcement says, "Are there others?" And so now you have witnesses or victims that can come out and say this, or you have DNA that's been collected through a series of I imagine these are stranger rapes of sorts, whether or not some dating, or I forget the circumstances, but now you have my guess here is as quick as they're able to get these additional charges, some great and mounting evidence, and it seems like every day that's going by, the evidence gets stronger. So I would say there are probably DNA links, and now that you have an identified individual and there's a buccal swab, and now you are able to put that DNA into a database and to see if there are other hits from unknown cases, if that's exactly what happened here, as opposed to coming up with an identity of an individual and additional people now contacting law enforcement to say that's the guy who also assaulted me, and I did report it. Or so it's fantastic police work, and it absolutely doesn't surprise me, and I think it lends to just how this what seems to be more like a serial rapist, and I would be surprised if there aren't additional.
And we are getting closer to the finish line. To put a little exclamation mark on the accused Boston serial rapist. One of those women, he actually attacked twice within 11 days. Not a good person if this guy, in fact, committed these crimes. Attacked the same woman, sexually assaulted or raped her twice within 11 days. I cannot imagine what went on in her mind and how she's, I'm sure, still dealing with the effects of that all these years later. Joey Wilson, Fil Waters, I'm glad brings this up. This case, we're talking about Rudy Farias, back to him, that truth is always stranger than fiction. I just asked this question of a psychologist yesterday. We were doing the Suzanne Morphew story, which is a missing mom in Colorado. She was married to a former professional athlete. Looks like he may have snapped, but the prosecution botched the case. Anyway, he looks like for the time being he's walking. But Fil Waters, have you found in your career that truth is stranger than fiction, and why?
Well, the answer is yes. It is always stranger. The truth is always stranger than fiction, because it is the truth. It's not something that's made up. It's something that's real life. And whatever the circumstances were that came together at that point in time that caused that particular event to occur is organic. And it's not something that somebody's sitting around a studio or a room trying to think up something. Because in my experience, I can tell you, of all the movies I've watched, all the cop shows I've watched, and all the stuff that I've watched on television that is produced from the minds of men, doesn't hold a candle to the incidents and events that I have seen myself that were the result of the actions of men and women in true time.
Sharon McCarthy, having my back here from Canada. Leave your DNA on the like button, please. I was going to do 2 more stories, but I feel like I've abused Fil this week, not Scott, because I had Fil. We did a 2-hour. We're always working here. That's what you don't know, behind the scenes. And these guys are gracious enough. And Fil told me an incredible story. So we'll leave it after this story. And Fil, this one is your home state. And this is news today. I am a former news reporter, so I like to stay on top of the news. The white Texas gunman, and that's important here, the white Texas gunman who shot and killed 23 people in a racist attack at an El Paso Walmart in 2019 was given 90 consecutive life sentences in federal prison on Friday. Fil Waters, this guy's name is Patrick Crucius. He was sentenced to these multiple life terms. He pleaded guilty in February to nearly 50 federal hate crime charges. And the quote is, he opened fire with an AK-style semi-automatic rifle on August 3rd, 2019, after he ranted online about a quote-unquote Hispanic invasion of Texas. I will ask you an open-ended question now. What's the matter with people?
Well, I've answered this before, and I think everybody knows what my answer is. But in that particular case, those were all federal charges that he pled to, these hate crime things. He's still looking at the state charge prosecution where the death penalty may be applied. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that he pled to the federal charges because they removed the death penalty from the table, if I'm not mistaken, on that case. But it's the hate crime stuff. I mean, to me, what he did, regardless of the motivation, was horrific. And that evildoer, the state of mind that he was in, is just a condition of what he did. These hate crime laws that really, I mean, it satisfies I guess an emotional need perhaps, or maybe a political agenda of some kind. But how many times can you punish somebody because they hated the person that they killed, or persons? Because every time an act of violence occurs, regardless of who it is on, and regardless of what form it takes, there is always the element of hate involved. So to pick out different parts of society and say that because they hated that particular group, therefore they are more guilty than what they did, I think is just it's contrived. So this person did what they did, and they did it for the reasons they did it, and they were made themselves an evildoer for having done it, fueled by hate. And hopefully that when he is tried under the state charges, that they will try that as a death penalty case, and he will be found guilty, and he will be given the ultimate punishment as a result of his actions.
Tali says, and I forgot this, Scott was here in Israel. He said he had crazy days in Tel Aviv. Phil, you would love it. Scott, how was Israel when you were there? How long were you there for?
I was there 3 months. Is a picture of the Dead Sea where I inscribed my 4 kids into what looked like sand, but it's all salt. So I toured the country up and down, both officially and, of course, personally. And
were you working a case there? What were you doing? Were you working a case?
So the FBI has what they call legal attaché offices.
Uh-huh.
And so a good friend of mine in the Bureau had known that I wanted to visit Israel for some time. So he was the head FBI agent and brought me over for a couple of months to kind of fill in for vacations and then kind of test the waters if I wanted to do a permanent assignment there. So I had a wonderful, wonderful time.
It's a cool. Tel Aviv is a very fun city. It's a party city. Marissa Hernandez correcting me. Boca Raton is mouth of the mouse, not rat, by the way. I'll take your word for that on Marissa, but either way, never thought of it that way. Fil Waters, I'm going to end on this, and this is actually very depressing. And Scott and I have actually, for full disclosure, talked about this amongst ourselves. I like to end on depressing things for some reason. And then we'll have get off of this story and end on something better. But Scott and I have talked about this because it's from his neck of the woods, and we've done a few stories. Without you knowing much about anything, but I'm going to explain to you, I wanted to get your quick take on this. And then I would love to get you guys to read up on it. And I told Scott this and do a full-fledged show. But there's a woman, Ellen Greenberg. I think I've mentioned her before, but we're now doing more and more shows. She was a school teacher in Philadelphia, the suburbs, Phil. 2011, she is found dead the night of a very bad snowstorm. She was going home to prepare food, to wedding plan. 20 stab wounds, 10 to the front, 10 to the back of her head, back of her neck. 2, it turns out, in an independent autopsy, confirmed that they happened after her heart stopped beating, which is hard to do because that means you're dead. And it was ruled a homicide initially. Within like 10 or 12 hours, it was ruled undetermined cause of death, and then 3 months later, a suicide. The judge of the fiance, the uncle, she was living with the fiance. He had an uncle who was high up as a judge, lawyer in the Philadelphia area. Before calling 911, the fiance calls this uncle. The uncle comes over. For whatever reason, Philadelphia police let them in. They're able to have a professional crime scene cleaning crew clean this place, and the uncle walks off with cell phones and laptops. Multiple investigators are kind of looking at this. It is a major travesty of justice. What should be done in this case? How would you go back? Not in details. I know you don't know the minutia that well, but if you were to start investigating this from scratch from 2011, where would you start on this?
Wow, we have talked about this case before. This is 12 years ago. Is that what I remember?
Yeah. 2011, so 12.
This occurred.
Yeah, 12 years ago. Yes.
I like that. Well, you would have to begin at the beginning, right? I mean, you've got to, if you've got access to that case file, I would want to see everything that has been accrued or accumulated through all of these investigations. I mean, all of it. And it would be a very tedious process to go through all of those reports, all of those lab reports, all of the witness statements that were taken, any kind of evidence that was collected, and try to piece together what is believed to have happened. And I tell you what, there are some times, and again, I don't know all those things about this case, but I can tell you that I have had cases where walking into the scene, it would appear that this person was murdered and was found by a family member. There's one specific case I'm thinking of. And it just looked like that. I mean, there was transfer blood.
It was the
house.
Yeah, it was the fiance who discovered her. He had said at the time that the security guard in the building went with him. The security guard never did. By the way, there's a stand-up guy. He's a former state trooper that Scott knows of named Tom Brennan, who's been investigating this pro bono. He is 100,000% convinced it is a murder. How can there be such a travesty of justice, Fil Waters?
Well, again, I don't know what he knows, and I don't know what the official investigators, detectives know. So it's really hard for me to comment on that. I'm just saying that in my own experience that I've had a scene that a family member found their family member dead. There was transfer blood all over the house. There were things that would indicate that this person was murdered, maybe even chased down and finished off. And as it turned out, the investigations showed that the person died from a heart attack induced by a particular medication they were taking. So, without seeing this whole thing laid out on a table and examining each piece of it, I would be reluctant to make any particular comment specific to it. But it's kind of amazing, though. You got this guy that's saying for sure, and I think I remember that the initial part of this was that it was ruled a homicide at the first part, right? And then the detectives and other people went and had the ruling changed, I think, either to suicide or undetermined. But so that makes me wonder right off the bat, what did they find in the course of the investigation that caused all of that to change suddenly? Because that's a pretty sudden change. To change it from a homicide to a suicide. I've had cases where it was ruled a suicide and then it turned out to be a homicide. But it's an odd case. There's no doubt about it, and it doesn't seem to be any end to it.
Well, I will. I told Scott this, and I told Scott I'm going to try to get you guys some of the case files if you want to look at it. And then maybe we can do a show about it because I'm trying to get the word out. Chelsea Whitaker, question for Fil and Scott. Scott, is a human brain like a goldfish? I'm not exactly sure what that means, but do you care to answer? And by the way, Scott, D.R. Parsons, you are clearly partial to Fil. If I was Scott, I would never, ever, ever return. Scott, we don't feel that way. You know that I love my children equally, and I love my detectives and FBI agents equally. So D.R. Parsons can sort of buzz off because she doesn't know the whole story, Scott. She doesn't know that we email each other, that we talk, that we hang out. So anyway, maybe it's my own guilt.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that comment's about.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But anyway, I don't even know what I was just asking you, Scott.
Back to the goldfish.
Yes. Is the human brain like a goldfish, Scott Duffy?
Ooh. Yeah. So what is that? I don't even know who wrote that. Are they indicating that the human brain is as small as a goldfish's brain, and a goldfish is pretty small to begin with? So, is that where they're leading down to?
Phil,
right.
Phil, were you able to? Phil, what are they talking about? Because I don't know. There is a joke though related to goldfish and humans. I can't remember what the joke is, and I'm thinking that it has to do with that. Hold on here.
I don't know. That's what I said. I mean, I'm waiting for the punchline.
It says follow-up in that there is a rumor that a goldfish will grow in size to its environment. Mo Dean, who likes to troll us, says goldfish might be smarter than most humans. That I don't disagree with. But what's this say? Francis weighing in on the Scott Duffy, Fil Waters attention giving. Scott don't get much talk time. That's all. Scott calculates his response. Scott is much more calculated for sure. And Scott's a sweetheart. I mean, even Fil calls him Saint Scott.
Switches back.
So I think that's the end of the show. I just don't know how to say goodbye to these guys. Fil Waters, I will have him wrap up first now so I don't get accused of letting him get the last word. Fil Waters has been a detective for 937 years and drives a Ferrari like Magnum PI. Phil, Bible study tonight, pizza tomorrow night. Is anything changing there?
No, I am a creature of habit. My OCD is in full bloom.
I love it. You're not having
my
a
wife reminds me all the time. And I want to say something about these people. This constant carping and all. Look. I'm the loudest one. Scott's the quiet one. That's the way it is. Get over yourselves. We make a great team. Joel is the host. We're always asked questions. I tend to talk more than Scott does. That's just the way it is. And if you don't like it, don't freaking watch. Good grief. Save yourself the stress. I mean,
and
move
we would
on.
Have made,
move
we
on.
would have made great partners.
Here, folks, move on.
Yeah, do you imagine Fil and Scott as actual partners, like covering an investigation? I wish we could go back in time and make that happen. Sally says everything we know already. Scott is very sweet. Hello, SDS Nation from Scotland. Ketchup says, oh, this warms my heart in a weird, twisted, demented way. Oh, always get sad whenever the show is about to end. Me too. That's why I can't say goodbye, Ketchup. Scott Duffy, you've got the seagull shirt on. Are you you going out for seafood tonight? What's happening?
No, not going out. So I just want to say 22 years ago today, my wife and I got married in a beautiful town in Pennsylvania outside Philadelphia. And so we celebrated before because as I saw the comments about changing dinner plans and whatnot, which is very nice, we did too. So we celebrated early, knowing the show would be here at 5.
Happy anniversary. I love it. Happy anniversary. 22 years. Misty says, Julie says, congrats. And Misty says, love the show. Have a great weekend, gentlemen. Look at this. Now they're starting to flood in. Scott knows how to pull on the heartstrings. Happy anniversary. Oh my God, that is so sweet. Look at that. OMG, that is so sweet. Catherine Regier in Hawaii. Happy anniversary. By the way, I am not T-Pain. I wasn't ignoring you today. I saw some comments. I was just, I don't know what happened. So shout out to T-Pain. Space Coast, perhaps the most important person here. He is the chief technical officer's blood relative. He was mad that I doxed him, but that guy keeps me in good graces with the chief technical officer. Whenever she flings a book my way in anger, I have to have Space Coast get involved and step in. Gentlemen, I appreciate it. A quick programming note. Sunday, 12 p.m. Eastern time. Fil will get up at 5 a.m. Hawaiian time to watch it. We are doing the case. It's a cold case from exactly 30 years ago. Brett Cantor was a 25-year-old music executive. I believe he was either stabbed 22 or 27 times in his home or on his way home. And the case is still unsolved. And there's an former LA County Sheriff's detective who is investigating this. There's a podcast called Dragonfly. He has been an integral part of that podcast. And we're going to have him on along with a profiler this Sunday with your co-host, the great Carm. She will be here. Until then, love you, America. Love you, Delaware. Now I got to put Scott first and Philly, even though Philly, get your act together with Ellen Greenberg. Do something, Mayor. Do something, Governor Shapiro. And love you, Hawaii and Houston. Aloha.
Aloha.